This is the Weekly You Demon.
We listen to every episode 5 times.
Alright, Dumpling Round 2. About a month ago I talked about that horrible Netflix movie, Dumpling. And at one point, when I was ranting about this horrible movie, I said something like, I think it's like fat is like the disfavored binary against health or something. I said it's almost like they're celebrating people being fat. I said I don't get it. Well, it turns out I was 100% accurate. I want to set this up a little bit. I've gotten a little bit of blowback from people who say, "Hey, enjoying the podcast, but you move kind of fast and you don't always go back and remind us what certain things mean." So here I want to go back and just revisit binaries in the whole deconstructionist, postmodern, social justice world of binaries. And here's what you need to keep in mind. To the social justice warrior, and by the way, social justism, not talking about the Catholic kind. I have problems with that too. But I'm talking in today's world. Social justism or social justice warriorism is the applied branch of postmodernism theory. You have postmodern theory, and the social justice warriors apply it to the real world, or the non-real world, since they don't think there is a real world. And in the social justice warriors world, binaries are Satan. Keep in mind, as Jacques Derrida basically showed, words have no meaning because they don't have meaning in relation to others. This is the old Hindu, Buddhist type concept of emptiness. Each word by itself has no meaning. It only has meaning in relation to others. Therefore, the words have no meanings. Therefore, the words don't point to any underlying reality. Okay. Therefore, to the postmodern, all truth is subjective. There is no truth. It's only what your head says. That's why you can have, Bruce Jenner saying he's a chick. Because if he says he's a chick, he's a chick. If I think that dog is a cat, that dog is a cat. So, my reality is not your reality. There is no reality. Whatever I say it is, it is. Whatever you say it is, it is. We then have these social realities, though. We, in society, favor certain things and disfavor others. Where do those come from? We say that guy's a bum on the street. Well, the social justice warrior says, well, you say he's a bum on the street, implying that he has less social worth than, say, Bill Gates, who has made our lives much more enjoyable with the computer. You're implying by calling him a bum that he's lesser in our society than someone like Bill Gates or the entrepreneur. And they say that's just an artificial construct put forward by the power structure. The power structure posits these binaries, and they're two halves. So there's a favored binary, entrepreneur, disfavored binary, bum. Favored binary, heterosexual, disfavored binary, homosexual. Male, female, colonialist, the colonized, Christian, Muslim, white, of color. They said those are all just artificial constructs by the power structure. It's part of their quote-unquote narrative. And you have to remember the word narrative. And they say the narrative just basically is put forward by the power structure, composed these binaries, and that narrative needs to be changed. And we change the narrative by attacking the binary, the whole binary structure. So, to get into the social justice warrior, the binary is Satan. It is the devil. And they see binaries freaking everywhere. They see binaries like Joseph McCarthy saw communists, and like the people of Salem saw witches. And they attack them ruthlessly, just like McCarthy and just like the Salemites. And there's a lot of emotional, psychological, spiritual truth in those statements and those analogies. I'm not going to explore them here, but just think about them. A lot of overlap, and it's not a coincidence. So, shifting back over to Dumpling, I posited, just speculating, that fat must be considered like the disfavored binary of health. And I didn't know that. I just thought, who knows? I also speculated in another episode that having sex on a feces-covered toilet, that might be considered the disfavored binary of having sex in a clean bed. I've not found any corroboration for that theory yet, but turns out I was dead nuts on when it came to the fat binary. There's a thing called the Sokal squared scandal. Sokal. S-O-K-A-L. This is a scandal where some academics wrote intentionally, it's freaking hilarious, intentionally absurd papers and submitted them to academic journals. And they're postmodernist papers, and they're absolutely ridiculous things like, I can't remember all the details. You listen to the Joe Rogan podcast I'm going to talk about here in a second. They go through and they give all sorts of examples, but yeah, basically how dogs humping other dogs is part of the power structure, things like that. And they were exposed. Actually, I'm not sure they're exposed as much as they just came forward and said, you idiots, because they got these articles published, I think like in a dozen different journals. Like one or two of the articles won an award for being particularly insightful, and it was all BS. They're just making this crap up and just showing us how ridiculous whole postmodern theories are and how the social justice warrior application of those postmodern theories is just absurd. And these articles just expose that. It's funny that people like Stanley Fish, wrote an op-ed to the New York Times saying that was unethical for them to do that. It was just like, unethical? To expose you for being a fraud? That'd be like someone tricking me into admitting I don't have a license to practice law, and then they tell everyone, this guy doesn't have a law practice. He can't practice law. He's not allowed to, but he's out there saying he can. It's like, well, that's unethical for you to go tell people that when you trick Shesky into admitting you didn't have a law license. It's like, well, maybe it was unethical to trick Shesky into admitting he didn't have a law license. But what he was doing was far, far worse with his fraud by saying he's a lawyer when he's really not. That's exactly the same thing happened here. That may have been unethical for them to say that these are legitimate papers, because there is a lie there, obviously. There's some deceit. But goodness gracious, he exposed a far, far bigger hoax in this whole postmodern theory. Anyway, so Joe Rogan interviews these guys back on October 30, 2018. I'd recommend the whole podcast episode. They go through the whole story. It's funny. But in this episode, I've just gone ahead and I've just isolated the 6 minutes or so pertaining to dumpling, the whole fat binary, because it's just stunning. And I'm going to warn you right now, the language is pretty bad. Rogan does not shy away from the F word and the S word. In fact, in this excerpt, he comes right out of the box, I think, with 2 F's and an S. So, if you have little kids listening, you may want to plug their ears.
It's exciting that you guys you've infiltrated and had these fucking dummies not just publish your shit, but praise it.
Yeah.
And say how amazing it is that you wrote a bit about fat bodybuilding.
Yeah.
I mean, fat acceptance is this one. Fat shaming and fat acceptance. They're two preposterous phrases. They really are. I mean, you shouldn't be mean to people. That's it. But fat shaming because someone's fat. No, if you can't call me fat because I'm not fat. Doesn't work.
Yeah, so that's
real similar.
That body of literature. Here's something that I learned when I read this, is they don't use the word obesity, because this is really interesting. Because obesity, it gets back to what Jim was saying. Obesity is a narrative. It's just a story. So they use the word fat. Excuse me. So there's not obesity bodybuilding. There's fat bodybuilding, and there are all these narratives. So why would one? Excuse me. Want to buy into one narrative rather than another narrative.
Why is fat okay and obesity bad?
Because obesity is a medicalized narrative,
That's
whereas
right.
fat is just a description.
Yeah.
So they're rejecting medicalized terms.
Well, they call it healthism. I'm not making that up.
What?
Healthism is a narrative. It's a power structure where healthy and thin people are imposing their view of how body should be
Yes.
on fat and unhealthy people.
And there's thin privilege. Like, they'd look at you and you've got all the, because you're muscular too, so you wouldn't just be straight, white, heterosexual, cis, etc. I mean,
you've got health privilege and
you've got health privilege, and
fitness
so
privilege, probably thin
fitness
privilege. For sure.
Also an ableist.
Ableist, you've got that privilege, dude. You're really, it's not good for you.
Yeah, it falls into that. So
health privilege, that's real. That's a real one they're using.
And they also claim to be the healthy at every size movement. You can be healthy at every size, and obesity is just a medicalized narrative.
Yeah, and that's really important though, because the point of that is to say if your doctor tells you you're fat and it's a health concern, then you don't have to listen.
Yeah, that is I've read that before. And I read an article by this woman who was morbidly obese.
Charlotte Cooper?
I don't know what her name was. Yeah. But she was talking, she was also using, like really misusing some studies on, there was some, there have been some studies on people who are overweight and that there could possibly be some health benefits to being overweight. These studies have been widely dismissed now. Not only dismissed, but they go in direct contrast to the great volume of studies that show how terrible it is for your health to be that fat and that heavy. But this person, I don't remember who it was or why she was doing this, but she was clinging to these 1 or 2 studies that have been dismissed. Right. These are biased epidemiological studies that have been dismissed, but she was putting them in this blog as if this is some sort of evidence that not only is it not unhealthy to be fat, but it might be healthy to be fat.
And now think about this person in an academic position as a professor teaching young people this, particularly young girls.
Particularly young girls who might have eating disorders.
Exactly.
Health, a white privilege? What? Oh my God, is this real? This is a real paper?
This is definitely real.
Oh
yeah, this is how this stuff goes, man. They think it's like when the doctor says you're overweight, it's a concern for your health. They see that as a form of fat shaming, saying that they're not all right the way that they are. They're not being accepted the way that they are. There's a power dynamic that healthy people are imposing upon overweight people. They have myriad issues that they come up with. And I mean, sure, some of these complaints have got to be somewhat real. They don't make as many oversized clothes, plus size clothes. It's harder to get styles. Or there's some legit stuff, that they might want to say, hey, well, can we do something about this? But on the other hand, the whole thing that saying that it has nothing to do with health, it has nothing to do with your triglyceride levels, heart disease, etc.
It's anti-evidence. It runs in the face of every conceivable piece of evidence. They're teaching kids this. They're in schools, and there are classes, fat studies classes, and there's an actual.
Whoa! There's fat studies.
There's fat studies.
That's the journal that published the fat.
The journal is Fat Studies. Jamie's going to bring it up.
The journal.
I told you, Pete. I told you 30 million people are waiting to find out
studies,
fat studies is real.
Interdisciplinary Journal of Body Weight and Society.
This is what Jim was telling me. He's like, when we do this, 30 million people are going to now know that there's something fat studies. Now, fat studies doesn't do what you think it does. You probably think, oh, fat studies, what are triglycerides? How much should you exercise?
No.
What's a good diet? How much sugar is too much sugar? Well, that is absolutely not what this journal does.
Frozen, a fat tale of immigration. What the hell?
Crafting weight stigma. Hold on a second. Crafting weight stigma in slimming classes. A case study in Ireland.
So I'm telling you, you go to a slimming class, you're going to go lose weight. You take a fitness class or something, whatever slimming classes are.
Fatness and temporality.
And they use a stigma against being fat. They basically say fat's bad for you.
Look at this one. Theorizing fat oppression, intersectional approaches and methodological innovations. You just said a bunch of nonsense.
The oppression of fat people is built into institutions, pervades the cultural landscape, and affects. Dude, we could have written this. And affects the relationship and perceptions of people of size. It is its introduction to the special issue on
people of size is not the new people of color.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah. Fat is the new black.
Parallel. That's right.
That's a little excerpt from Alan Parsons' project, the song Time. It's a pretty big hit for them. I listened to it a lot when I was 6th grade. Probably going through puberty, have all these emotions going through me, listen to Time, tears coming out of my eyes. I don't think so, but I do remember listening to it a lot, and I go back and listen to it now. I'm just like, gosh, it's just freaking awful. Anyway, it's an introduction, though, to what a very important subject, and that is time. Saw a survey last week that said the average American has 4 hours and 26 minutes of free time every week. Not every day, every week. And I read a couple articles on this quote-unquote study, and I don't get it. They don't seem to be distinguishing or explaining what free time is. I couldn't find the study readily. Maybe I'm sure it's out there, but after some extensive surfing, like for 90 seconds, I couldn't find the study, so I didn't pull it up. But they don't talk about, in the articles I read, they didn't distinguish between like primary obligations and non-primary obligations. Because as far as I'm concerned, once your primary obligations are taken care of, everything else is free time. Let's recount for a second what I mean by primary obligations. Those are things that you cannot shirk without other people's society rightfully thinking you are a jackass. So, if I don't earn a living for my family, I'm a jackass, and my family is a primary obligation. I gotta take care of them. Taking care of your parents is another one. And again, distinguishing between what's a primary obligation, what's not, that's not always easy. And again, go back to the very, very earliest podcast, and I talk about primary obligations in two different episodes. But that's how I define free time here. And so me, for instance, I spend, depending on the season, anywhere from 10 to 20 hours in my garden / farm. Well, part of that would probably be a primary obligation, but most of it's not. And so right away, I know I have, more than 4.5 hours of free time every week. But no matter, that's what the study said. Absurd or not, that's what it said. And it does highlight an issue in this culture, is everyone feels strapped for time. Even the social justice warriors are probably like, hey, there's just not enough time in the day to F up everything. There's so many things to F up, I don't have enough time to get it all done. And that is one thing we can all agree on. Things seem far more hectic now than they were in the 1950s. My mom agrees with that. She was active back in the 1950s. Even compared to the 1980s, I can tell you, I was a teenager back then, early 20s. But I know things are far more laid back, just looking how adults lived. My dad, who was a fairly high level executive at a New York Stock Exchange corporation, he spent like an hour and a half every morning exercising, reading the newspaper, eating breakfast. Man, frick, I get up, I take care of some things downstairs. Boom, I'm at the office within like probably 45 minutes after I wake up. And I'm not unusual in that regard at all. I don't know hardly anyone who eats breakfast anymore. And by the way, it's not the most important meal of the day. That's kind of just a fraud that's been perpetrated on the American people. I'll talk more about that later, but I'm a big fan of intermittent fasting. 16 hours without food, 8 hours with. It's kind of funny, little detour here. I started doing that back in like 2011. It's big in the Paleolithic diet, the paleo diet that I more or less follow. And had a lot of success with it, but I kind of got away from it over the years. I went from like 16 hours to 14 hours to 12 hours. I kind of had it in my head, 12 to 14 was intermittent fasting. Then my nephew reminded me, he got into it and he's had success with it. He goes, no, it's got to be 16 hours. And I looked into it some more, like, yeah, he's right. It's over the years, I kind of pulled away from intermittent fasting, but I'm getting back into it and really enjoying it. Anyway. So no one's eating breakfast anymore, but it's not because they're intermittent fasting, it's because they gotta get their buttocks to work. Everyone feels stressed for time. And the question is why? Well, Econ Talk to the rescue. Go check out the interview with Daniel Hammermish, who wrote a book called Spending Time, Our Most Valuable Resource. It's the March 25th episode of Econ Talk. It's excellent. Well, actually, I should say that the first third of it's excellent because he lays out his thesis, and it's funny. He makes a very bald, bold, simple statement, but he puts it out there as absolute fact that kind of cuts through all questions of why we feel this way. He said the reason we feel strapped for time is very, very simple. In the past 50 or 60 years, our real income has tripled. And again, by real income, he means things we're able to buy with our money. So it's basically inflation adjusted. Our real income in this country has tripled. Our life expectancy, however, has only gone up 15%. So effectively, we have 3 times as much money and no additional time in which to spend it. That money then in turn opens up all sorts of possibilities of things you can do with that money. And those things are pretty freaking cool, and therefore you want to do those things, and therefore you do those things, thereby leaving you less time to deal with your primary obligations. And now here, this whole primary obligation, I'm kind of putting my spin on what he's saying, but that is exactly what he's talking about. I'll give you Exhibit A. My trip to Los Angeles earlier this month. I mean, getting out the freaking door, with the office, dealing with some home stuff on the home front that has to be taken care of to keep the house, from falling down while we're gone, and then dealing with stuff when I get back, it's hell. And why? Well, because I had an extra $1,000 to spend on plane tickets to Los Angeles. My wife got on for $200 round trip each. Marie's great at finding bargains like that. But still, it's $1,000 that I doubt someone at my socioeconomic class 50 years ago probably couldn't come up with, 5 plane tickets to and from LA, for the family. I make decent money, but I expect I make a ton of money compared to what people were making 50 years ago in my socioeconomic class. And that allows me to buy a vacation to Los Angeles. And I'm going to take it because that's a freaking fun, cool thing to do. But that then gloms out like 9 days, boom, out of my schedule. And now those 9 days of primary obligations got to be shoved into the time before leaving for Los Angeles and time to come back from Los Angeles, creating like a living hell. It's funny when I first listened to that. I remember I was out at the garden. I'm planting these plugs. I think they call them the lettuce plugs and kohlrabi plugs. And I heard him say that, and I was like, I turned off the podcast. Like, what? Is it really that simple? Yeah, and I mean, the more I thought about it, the more I was like, he's absolutely positively right. The question becomes then, how do you deal with that? And I don't have an answer. I will point out a couple things, a couple observations. First off, enjoy it. Okay? You are 3 times wealthier than your parallel predecessor would have been back in the 1950s. Enjoy it. It's a blessing. Don't forget that. It's a blessing. It's not a curse. It's a blessing. Now, you need to manage it. And I think the first thing to do to manage it is don't fret about it. Don't stress about it. I'm going to read here one of my favorite quotes from that Robin Daniels book, The Virgin Eye. And again, which is all about Christian mindfulness. Quote, "The art of a fulfilled life is to be energetic without tension." Okay, to be energetic without tension, dynamic without agitation, serene but not aloof. Focus on that first part. The art of a fulfilled life is to be energetic without tension. So go ahead and do these things. Enjoy the money, do other things, but don't start stressing out about it. And most responsible people aren't going to neglect their primary obligations. But if you're going to start stressing about anything, it ought to be only about the primary obligation stuff. And again, ideally don't stress out about anything. Stress, by the way, is always self-centered. Whenever you find yourself stressing out about anything, I don't care what it is self-centered. Excess stress is always a sign of selfishness. Maybe even narcissism. That you're so absorbed in your own crap that you're stressing out. And this comes from a dude who deals with a ton of stress, and it's my fault. Okay? And you need to keep that in mind for yourself as well. If you're feeling stress, it's your fault. Stress always comes from inside. Yes, external pressures push on it, but ultimately it's your call what you do with those external pressures. For this podcast segment, sure as hell, don't stress out about the non-primary obligations. Just start there. For me, that would have been a huge improvement in my life for the past 30 years. I remember one time, one of my family members mocked me back when I was a teenager. I was taking up billiards, pool. I can still shoot very well to this day. I'm not great, but for someone who never plays anymore, give me about 10 minutes of practice, I can start sinking balls again. Now, one of my family members kind of dickish of him, but he basically said, he goes, the thing about you is you shouldn't take up any sort of, you should take up nothing. No matter what you take up, you obsess over and start stressing out over it. And he is absolutely right. So when your immediate family members tell you something, you may want to listen to them. They're probably insightful. They're probably being a dick about it, but they're probably giving you some good insight as well. So there, one point of reference. If you're going to stress out, never stress out about non-primary obligation things. And then maybe at that point you can move on, not stressing out about primary obligations either, once you start realizing that's all self-centered. And I think if you want a book about that, I think it's Into Your Hands, Father by Winifred or Wilfred Stennison. I'll put a link up on the at the website. He talks about how, in one chapter, he talks about how basically stress is always self-centered, and he kind of explores it from a spiritual standpoint. And then another thing that the podcast, the Econ Talk podcast, touches on is that we almost look at business as a social status thing. Like, the busier you are, the more important you are. And that's really kind of a bizarre thing. 'Cause let's face it. We are 3 times wealthier in real terms than we were 50 years ago. I think that's an economic fact. But yet we all have less time at our disposal because we're doing cool stuff with that money. So time is now the thing that's at a premium. Not money, but time. So in a way, you should want to portray to your peers and the people in your community that you are a man of leisure. That, you have time to burn. And that would be the rich guy in today's world. So it's kind of bizarre in that sense, to the extent that you're always trying to seek status. It's like, why do you want people to think you're busy? You should want people to think you have a ton of leisure. That would show them how wealthy you really are, because you have a lot of time. Now, they discuss in the podcast why people don't do that. I mean, one, if you're busy all the time, that probably implies that you have the money to do cool things otherwise. Again, I'm not sure any of us consciously think that through, but that would be the implication. It's like, look, I got so much freaking money. I am jet setting all over the place. I'm buying up property here. I'm doing this or that. I got important things to do with my time because I have money, and therefore I don't have a lot extra time to do A, B, or C. There's also the sense that, with like me being an introvert, I mean, I know for a fact, I've caught myself doing this on numerous occasions. I want people in the office to think I'm busy, so they freaking leave me alone. So you're bringing in personality traits, things like that, but, if you have that look in your face, this is actually a Seinfeld episode where George always looks like he's just really busy, freaking out. Just like people at the Yankee organization leaves him alone. Well, there's a lot of that here. It's like, hey, if you look really busy and you're always running around, people are like, well, don't bother that dude, he's busy. And if you're an introvert like I am, that's really a good thing. Alright, let's wrap up with some lighting segments. Hey, a new feature. Spotify recommendations. I dig the way that Spotify makes recommendations of other songs you might like based on songs in your playlist. Had like a treasure trove of songs hit me the other day. And here they are. Catamaran by Alalas. Catamaran, Catamaran. You Must Have Met Little Caroline by J.D. McPherson. And Sambredu Sunburn by Eagles of Death Metal. Highly recommended songs. Yeah, so we did Rodeo Drive. We were out in California, Beverly Hills there. I guess it's pretty highfalutin, so I took $100 out of my wallet and put that in my hand, so they knew they were dealing with a player. I tell you, if I go into one more quote-unquote sports bar that does not have the premier athletic event on the screen, preferably multiple screens where everyone can see it, I'm going to throw a fit. We go into a bar in Monterey. I can't remember, something called the Monterey Can Brewing Company or something like that. They put us in a separate room, not the bar. 7 TVs, and they have the Texas Tech Gonzaga game, I think it was. Yeah, Texas Tech Gonzaga. Playing like in the far corner, where like 90% of the seats could not get a good view of it. And then they had like motorcycle racing, Major League Baseball, like a fishing show or something. I'm not even sure what it was. And then two stations were showing the women's NCAA basketball tournament, and I can kind of see maybe one screen being dedicated to that, but two, when only one is dedicated to men's, just based on naked viewership, it should be like a 4-to-1 ratio. And I forget what else was showing. It's something, I don't know, maybe it was, lacrosse or something, but geez, so Pete, it's like, and I see that a lot. Sports bars who just have no clue, like, what the premier event is. And so they just put on this variety of crap. Heck, I've been in sports bars that are showing the news during like bowl games. But if you're a sports bar owner or manager, understand when big sporting events are playing. A friend of mine tells me his daughter's grades may not be quite up to snuff to get into the University of Michigan. That's where she really wants to go. So he has her. She's only like a freshman. And he has her working already on her essay, growing up gay in a Catholic family. He's thinking that, that'll get her in. The problem is, then she shows up her freshman year, and she'll probably be being approached by these LGBTQXYZ groups, and she has to tell them, hey, I'm not really a lesbian, I'm not gay. And they're going, what the heck, you wrote that essay, what do you mean you're not gay? And my friend said he's going to tell her, tell them your parents sent you to gay conversion camp during the summer and broke you of it. Hey, I did kind of a crappy thing when talking about stress and being self-regarding, the statement that all stress is ultimately self-regarding and self-centered. And instead of telling you, why, I referred you to a book to go read, and no one wants to do that. Again, the book is highly recommended, but let me explain why stress is self-regarding. Because stress all breaks down to one thing. It's something bad is going to happen to you if you don't get A, B, or C, or A, B, or C happen to you, or whatever. Stress is ultimately just about bad things happen to you based on external circumstances. And it's really that simple. And the more stress you feel, the more self-centered you are, because the more concerned you are about yourself and things going bad for yourself. So work it through your own mind, but I think when you find yourself under stress and you break it down, you'll see that that's exactly what it is, and that's all it is. Of course, what would happen if you're so focused on some other person that when something starts going wrong for that person, you start feeling stress? Is that then self-centered? I don't know. And for instance, if I know one of my kids is really unhappy or something's going really bad for them, I start feeling some stress. Now, Dorothy Day said that concern for your children, that's just an extension of yourself. Okay, I'm not sure she's right about that, but I'm still kind of working it through my own head. Okay, but now let's just say you're taking care of the elderly lady down the street, and you're really concerned about her, and you spend a lot of time helping her, and she starts having some problems of some sort. Do you start stressing out then, or are you not stressed? Is the mere act of being wholly, looking outward, and you're so totally gauged on something on the outside, taking the focus off yourself entirely, does that eliminate the stress? Unfortunately, I'm not that good of a person, so I can't speak to it. But maybe some of the saints in this listening audience can let me know. Okay, that's a wrap for the week. Go check out the Facebook page, subscribe to the Twitter feed, tell your friends and family. Go to UDemon Podcast for show notes and other information. As always, thanks for listening.